It's easy to become anonymous, lost in a crowd. It's almost as easy to slip out of touch, out of contact, out of favour, to become lost in a much more literal sense. The business of finding lost people and bringing them home has often fallen to the Salvation Army. Heading up the Army's family tracing service is Bronwyn McFarlane. In her own life, she's experienced more than her fair share of loss and abandonment. But along with that, again and again, she's discovered the delight of being found, the satisfaction of reconciliation. And Bronwyn's tried to make that experience of reunion possible for other people who've become lost on life's way.
I've been in the family tracing service for about 9 years now, and we look for missing family people who've gone missing for a whole lot of different reasons. It can be a fight in the family, it can be lack of correspondence. Hey, come in. I'm Bronwyn from the family tracing service. Have a seat. How can we help you today?
Who comes asking you to find them?
We have lawyers, we have road sweepers, and everything in between. We have 200 to 300 new inquiries every year. We ask people to complete an application form. So when the mail comes in, we open up the application forms and assess them, see if they fit within our criteria. And then we have to register the inquiries that do fit and set about looking for the people. That involves electoral roll searches, telephone searches, searches of the birth, death and marriage indexes often. I do that at the National Library half a day a week. Some people want to apologise for something that's happened. Some people just want simply to make contact. Sometimes it's contact for the first time if they've just found out that there's a half-sibling they didn't know about, or with an adoption inquiry, people needing to know about their family background, who they are, in that sort of family, biological family sense.
I guess one question would be, why is the Salvation Army doing this?
Well, it goes back, I guess, to the early 1880s, where people started writing to General William Booth, the founder of the Salvation Army, asking him if he could find their daughters who'd gone into London to try and find work because of the poverty in the countryside. And the families just didn't hear from them again. And sadly, some of those young women had been met at the railway station by ladies who offered them not only work but accommodation to go with it, and they found they were virtual prisoners in brothels. So the families said could ask William Booth if there was something he could do to try and find out what had happened to their girls. William Booth was a Methodist lay preacher, and he felt called to address some of the issues for the people in the East End of London, and so he was ministering to those people, but when he took them to church they didn't really fit in. They were the down and outs back in Victorian London, and the other people didn't feel comfortable with them, and they didn't feel comfortable in the churches either.
And his movement flourished?
Against a lot of opposition, yes it did.
The army was working with people on the street and worshipping on the street?
Absolutely, yes, yes.
When the first Salvation Army band marched the streets in Salisbury, England in 1878, they were called hooligans. An outraged public complained of the rowdyism of a travelling menagerie and threw stones at them.
Very soon, a lot of people felt it was a place where they wanted to worship, and they also liked the fact that the church was very strongly allied with a social expression of the faith.
In these times when we're increasingly focused on peace, and actually peace is a central religious theme, is there still a place for a Christian organisation called the Army, the Salvation Army. I mean, isn't that a bit militaristic?
Oh, yes, it is militaristic, isn't it?
Yeah.
It definitely is a place for a Salvation Army, because we're not fighting about people, we're fighting against sin and against the damage that it does in society. We see poverty big time. We see people with broken lives from addictions and all other sorts of things that can cause harm, broken relationships and things like that. The Army's there to fight against those things.
Your own parents didn't come from the Salvation Army itself, but they joined it.
Yes, I'm not exactly sure what drew them to the Salvation Army initially. My mother had been brought up open brethren, but both her and Dad found that Salvation Army was the place where they felt led to be and where they felt they were able to express their Christian faith. I was about 7 months old when my parents went to training college, the youngest at that stage of 3 children, and there were no facilities for children at the college.
So it was a live-in establishment?
It was a live-in establishment, yes. So my 2 elder sisters went to a Salvation Army children's home for that year, and I went to live with my grandmother.
Right. Where was she? In Wellington?
She was in Papakura.
In Papakura.
Yes.
So 7 months old, your parents came down to Wellington, you're with your grandmother. It's pretty...
very traumatic.
Yeah.
I didn't obviously understand that at the time, but I fairly quickly became very ill. I had severe, covered from head to foot with eczema, weeping eczema, and I had to be flown down to Wellington and spent a considerable time in hospital while they cleared up the eczema.
Right. Your parents were able to keep a close eye on you here.
My parents were able to visit me a couple of times a week while I was in Wellington. Yeah.
Gosh, this would have been a very stressful time for them, I imagine.
Yeah, very stressful. Real sacrifice, which was just a proof of their total dedication and their belief that they were doing what God had called them to do.
Do you think that experience has affected you?
Oh, definitely. It's had a major significance in my life, certainly with health issues and with the way I relate to people in terms of things like an abandonment complex, which is, a fancy name, I guess, for something that happens. 7, 8 months old is a very pivotal time in a child's life in terms of relationships and awareness of being and not being, and so naturally that had a major effect on me.
Your parents spent that year training.
Yes.
What happened to them and the family then?
After they were commissioned, we were all reunited, and we were sent down to the South Island for their first appointment, where they were ministers in the church or the corps. They were required to raise their own income, which part of was from the tithing of the church, but of course new Salvation Army officers were sent to a very small church, so that was a real challenge, particularly a family with 3 children. And so they had to sell the war cries in the hotels.
This is the magazine.
Salvation Army magazine.
They must have been very lean times.
Very lean times. There were the occasions when they went to bed at night and prayed that there would be some food for the next day. Yes.
With 3 children. Now that's pretty haunting.
Yeah. I can remember when I was a little older, Mum having very small servings of food to ensure that we had sufficient.
Right.
Yeah.
Were you perceived by your peers to be Salvation Army kids? Was that a different kind of status?
It definitely was of a different kind of status. Although the Salvation Army had been around a long time, we were still considered pretty weird, even by other mainline Christian denominations. So there was a bit of harassment and barracking, which by the time I got to intermediate school, I was really quite victimised.
But here in New Zealand about the same time, they weren't so popular. In Dunedin, the Otago Daily Times was particularly rude. Bring in Salvationists to New Zealand will be another of the many mistakes of acclimatization. It is the thistles, sparrows, the rabbits all over again. The army will prove a nuisance as troublesome as these pests and as ineradicable.
The girls in my class at intermediate school would talk about the noise of the fleas flying around my head. I think they were confused between mosquitoes and fleas, and pressing themselves against the walls when I walked past so that I didn't touch them.
So this was because your parents were working with down and outs?
Yes, it was, yes.
We are talking the 1950s and 60s here, aren't we? So
yeah, 1960s,
it was a different world.
Yes, it was a different world. And certainly they didn't teach tolerance of differences back in schools in those days, which they do now.
I'll never forget what the Lord has done for me. I'll never forget how he came and set me free, how he broke those chains that had me bound, and now I have redemption found. I'll never forget what he's done for me.
It's often said that you can't criticise anybody except Christians, really, in terms of being politically correct. Unfortunately, Christians still seem to come in for a few.
Why do you think that is?
I think part of it's sort of the rebellion against New Zealand being seen as a Christian country, and also I think perhaps a feeling that Christianity in the past has perhaps been foisted on people. We used to sing hymns at school and say prayers at school and things like that. So there's possibly some of the withdrawal from that.
A reaction against that.
Because it's an army always marching as to war, you can expect stiff discipline, even if you're only a schoolgirl.
With my father being our minister, it was pretty strict. In fact, it was very strict. My father was a very stern parent, so we used to have to sit and listen to Dad's preaching twice on Sunday.
Twice on Sundays, yes. And Sunday would be a very different kind of day than it is now.
Oh, yes, yes. We spent a lot of time at the army. Dad would have gone off to the prayer service at 7 o'clock in the morning, home for breakfast. We went to Sunday school. We went immediately from there to the church service, home for lunch, back down to church for the doctrine class, back home, and then a quiet day where you didn't do any unnecessary work. We might do handcraft, something like that.
Right.
Special tea on Sunday night, and then back out to church in the evening.
Right. So was there any question in your mind that you were part of this community, part of this faith community?
No, I guess I always felt part of that, and I was brought up to know and understand about God's love for me.
Father, we lift up to you people who can't be with us this morning, those who are unwell or haven't been able to make it for some other reason. And Lord, we pray that right now they would get a real sense of your presence, that they would know that you cover them and that you love them.
One day we were getting ready to go to church, and my eldest sister had some perfume. And so my sister and I borrowed some of her perfume and wore it to church. And during the service, I felt very, very guilty about what I had done. And
You hadn't so much borrowed as taken this.
I knew that I had stolen my sister's perfume, even at 6 years of age, and felt convicted about that in a Christian sense, and asked, when the altar call came, I went and knelt at the altar and asked God to forgive me for my sins and to transform my life and make me into an obedient Christian child.
Who did you feel God was then?
My vision of God as a child, I guess in many respects related to my understanding of God as a father based on my own father. So he was quite a stern God. He kept a list of what I did wrong, which doesn't mean that my father kept a list of what I did wrong, but I guess he wrote down in his book of life what the things I had done wrong. And so I guess guilt was a big issue for me growing up, in trying to not do anything that was going to make God cross with me.
Right.
If the Creator is on our side, cheering us on, if the God of the universe is right alongside us, helping us to do what he wants, Paul says, who can be against us?
I have come and developed more of an understanding, a bigger understanding of God, where he's a loving God. He doesn't want to see me hurt myself. He's made me as a human being, and he actually expects me to be a human being, and he understands that. So he looks at me if I do something wrong and says, I'm so sad to see you hurting yourself. You know, let's stop now and fix it up and get it right again. So, yeah.
At a certain point, you met the person who was to become your husband. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, I was playing in the Napier Salvation Army band, and the band was doing a trip to Porirua for on a long weekend, and we were being billeted by the members of the Porirua Salvation Army, and one certain woman said to her son, do we want to billet males or females? And he said, well, females, of course. So I was billeted at the Miller household and met the man who was to become my husband.
Right.
Yeah. After we married, we applied to become Salvation Army officers and were accepted.
Right.
Yeah. We had a one-year-old at that stage, and
your baby was able to stay with you?
Yes, the Salvation Army had established accommodation for families with children, so we were able to have our son with us. I don't think I could have put him through the experience that I had gone through.
So in those 20 years, there had been a significant movement within the army
yes.
too?
It took some time, but moves were put in place for families to stay together with their parents.
Even if your father and your father's father joined the army, that doesn't mean that you have to join too. There are some disadvantages for an officer. It means for a lieutenant, starting on $25.60 a week. You supply your own uniform, and if you think of marriage, you must marry someone who is also in the army and also holds a commissioned rank.
We were commissioned as Salvation Army officers in January 1977 and sent out to run Salvation Army Corps. And we too went south.
Did you? Yeah.
Yes.
Where did you go first?
We went to Winton, and we were at Winton for 2 years, and then at Gore for 1 year. Yes, after that we moved into social work. I'd had severe postnatal depression after each of my children.
Young children, moving quite a lot, postnatal depression. How did you survive? This was no life of luxury.
It was no life of luxury, no. My faith very much helped to get me through that situation. I took medication as was appropriate, and yeah, my faith, I would in bad times sit at the desk doing huge jigsaw puzzles and singing hymns.
Wow.
And really that was the sort of thing that kept me going.
And I guess you had to keep going.
Yeah, we had a church to run. I had responsibilities, including preaching a sermon each Sunday, leading a church service each Sunday. It was a challenge, but yeah, I guess God gave me the strength to get through. I must think of Him in my darkest hour, when I cannot see what will be, and despair stifles prayer.
But it didn't last. At a certain point, the family broke up.
Yeah, it did. We'd had a rough relationship in many respects, partly attributed to my extensive depression, but also, there were issues on my husband's side as well. And eventually he found somebody he felt he would be more happy living with, and left the marriage.
Right. That was personally pretty devastating?
It was incredibly devastating. I think for me, perhaps even more than the end of the marriage, was the fact that it meant I could no longer be a Salvation Army officer for at least a period of time.
So why was that?
At that stage, the Salvation Army terminated your officership if your marriage ended, and you could not reapply until 2 years after the end of legal proceedings, which meant in New Zealand a minimum of 4 years.
You moved from a situation where you had a husband and a family and work, and suddenly you were on your own with the 4 children and no support.
And also I lost my home because we lived in Salvation Army House. So I was very fortunate. The Salvation Army had a vacant house which they allowed me to use, as it turned out, for 6 months. So I was very blessed in that, and it was a fully furnished house. So that gave us a breathing space in which I was able to establish myself and re-establish myself as a human being, really, and myself as a person. And then we moved into a council flat for the next 10 years.
How did you feel about the army about the time? Were you angry at all?
Actually, I wasn't angry. Interestingly, later on, people were angry on my behalf, and I had to explain to them what I felt was the Army's view on that. That you really couldn't be a Salvation Army officer when you were in personal crisis. You can't be helping people in the way that, whether it was in a church ministry or in a social sense, when your own life was in a personal crisis.
So you had an understanding and an acceptance of that yourself?
I think my life has been a lot of acceptance.
Right. So you're in a council flat with the children. How did you survive?
Well, obviously the domestic purpose benefit was available to me, and I went in to apply for the benefit after my husband told me that the relationship was finished, and queued up in the same queue as some of the clients that had been in the institution that I was working in. That was very humbling. So at Christmas time, we would be given a food parcel of Christmas treats and some gifts for the children, which really helped a great deal. And things like that the Army did for us. There were a family at church who gave us vouchers so that we could have meat on the table every day instead of once or twice a week.
So you continued to worship with the Salvation Army, to be part of that community?
Absolutely, yes, yeah. Down.
How did you go about putting, if you like, your life back on track?
I acknowledged that I had to look after myself, and so I did some things that were nice for me. I also went to university, and I started off doing a Bachelor of Science degree in biochemistry. Unfortunately, a few months into that, I was having some physiotherapy and ended up with a disc lesion. So my neck was in a brace for the next 4 years, and I had to withdraw from my full-time study. Good girl. About that time, I was able to reapply to the Salvation Army and ask them to take me back as a Salvation Army officer. They'd never taken back a single mum with dependent children at that stage. So
So it's a little bit groundbreaking, really.
Somewhat, yes. They said to me, would I consider doing some training? And I said, yes, I would. And they asked me to train in social work, which was a 2-year full-time course, and I did that. And then they asked me if I would be the director of the Salvation Army Family Tracing Service.
Ah, great.
Yeah.
Looking back, do you think your experience, your faith journey, I guess your experience of loss and trauma as well, has helped prepare you in particular ways for this particular vocation?
Oh, certainly it has. I don't think God wastes any experience. And so understanding what it is to have loss, to be separated from people that you love, that are important to you, gives me a marked degree of empathy with the clients. And also my own marriage breakdown helps me to understand some of those issues as well, and to be there a bit more for the clients. God's about reconciliation and healing, and family tracing is about reconciliation and healing, so certainly those two tie up really strongly in my understanding, but also being able to ask God for guidance about helping people is really important to me. You can't have a relationship with somebody without communicating with them, and prayer is, for me, about talking with God and listening to what He's got to say to me. There are times when I'll just sort of shoot a prayer quickly, might be on the phone, God, what next? Or help me with this. How do I help this person? God, please can I have a parking space while I go and do some research? Yeah, lots of little messages to God, yeah. Each morning when I'm driving to work, I go down a hill in Wellington, and if I lift my eyes, I see the most amazing view, and it's just a real God moment for me on the way to work. Sometimes it's misty, it's looking out over the harbour and the hills, and sometimes it's misty, sometimes it's bright and shiny, but I just really feel a real stirring in my soul from that view. It's a real God moment.
This program was made with funding from New Zealand On Air.